You are conscious right now. You are reading these words. You are experiencing something. There is something it is like to be you, a subjective feeling, an inner experience. This experience is the most obvious fact about your existence, more certain than anything else. You could doubt the external world. You could doubt other people. You could doubt physics. But you cannot doubt that you are conscious, that you are experiencing something right now. And yet consciousness is the thing science understands least. We can explain atoms. We can explain galaxies. We can explain how stars form and how life evolves and how brains process information, but we cannot explain why any of that feels like anything, why there is an inner experience at all, why consciousness exists. This is not a gap in our knowledge that will be filled by more research. This is a conceptual problem, a problem with the nature of the question itself. Feynman understood this. He was asked about consciousness many times, in lectures, in interviews, in private conversations, and his answer was always the same. We do not know what consciousness is. We do not know how to think about it scientifically, and maybe we never will. This bothered people. They wanted Feynman to solve the problem. He was a genius. He had solved so many other problems: quantum mechanics, particle physics, the Challenger disaster. Surely he could crack consciousness. But Feynman refused to pretend. He said consciousness might be beyond science. Not because science is limited, but because the question might not have a scientific answer. It might be the wrong kind of question. Here is the problem. Science explains things in terms of other things. You explain chemistry with physics. You explain biology with chemistry. You explain psychology with biology. Everything reduces. Everything connects. But consciousness does not reduce. You cannot explain the redness of red in terms of wavelengths of light. The wavelength is 650 nanometers. Fine. But why does that wavelength look red? Why does it have a quality, a feel, an experience? The physics does not answer that, cannot answer that.
The experience is something extra.
Something that exists beyond the physical description. Philosophers call this the hard problem of consciousness. There are easy problems. How does the brain process visual information? How do neurons fire? How does memory work? These are hard in practice, but easy in principle. They are engineering problems, information processing problems. You study the brain, you map the circuits, you figure out the mechanisms. Done. But explaining why any of that feels like anything, why there is subjective experience, that is the hard problem, and nobody knows how to solve it. Feynman was honest about this. He said science describes how things behave, not what they are. We can describe how consciousness correlates with brain activity. When you see red, this part of the brain activates. When you feel pain, these neurons fire. We can map the correlations, but correlation is not explanation. Knowing which neurons fire does not tell you why firing feels like anything, why it is not just information processing in the dark, why there is somebody home, why there is experience. Some scientists claim consciousness is not a real problem. They say consciousness is just what brains do. Information processing. There is no mystery. When you understand the brain, you understand consciousness. But this misses the point. We are not asking how brains work. We are asking why brains produce experience. We are basically why they produce something it is like to be. A rock does not experience anything, or computer does not experience anything, but you do. What is the difference? What makes some physical systems conscious and others not? Other scientists claim consciousness will be explained eventually. We just need more data, better brain imaging, detailed maps of neural connections. Once we understand the brain well enough, consciousness will become clear. But Feynman did not think so. He thought the problem was deeper. Not a lack of data, a lack of concepts. We do not have the right framework, the right language, the right way of thinking, and maybe we never will. This is not defeatism. This is realism. There are questions science can answer, How does the brain work? How do neurons communicate? How does information flow? Science is good at these questions, excellent at them. But there are also questions about why things feel the way they feel. Why red looks red and not blue? Why pain hurts and pleasure feels good? These might not be scientific questions. They might be outside the domain of science. Not because science is weak, but because the questions are asking for something science does not provide. Feynman compared it to asking why the universe exists. Science can describe the universe,
How it began, how it evolves.
how galaxies form. But why there is something rather than nothing? That is not a scientific question. It is a philosophical question. Maybe even a meaningless question. Consciousness might be similar. We can describe what correlates with consciousness, what brain states correspond to what experiences. But why those brain states feel like anything? That might be outside science. Forever. This makes people uncomfortable. We want answers. We want to believe every question has an answer. Every mystery can be solved. But maybe some mysteries are permanent. Maybe consciousness is one of them. Feynman accepted this. He did not pretend to know what he did not know. He did not invent explanations that felt good, but explained nothing. He just admitted ignorance and moved on. Worked on problems that could be solved. Left consciousness to the philosophers. Let's be clear about what we do know. We know a lot about brains. Neuroscience has made extraordinary progress. We can measure brain activity with incredible precision. Functional MRI shows which regions activate during different tasks. EEG measures electrical activity. We can record individual neurons. We can stimulate specific brain areas and observe changes in perception and behavior. We have detailed maps of neural circuits. We understand how vision works, how memory forms, how decisions are made at the neural level. The brain is no longer a black box. It is becoming transparent. We also know that consciousness correlates with brain activity. Damage certain brain regions and consciousness changes. Damage the visual cortex and you lose visual experience. Damage the frontal lobe and your personality changes. Anesthesia shuts down certain brain networks and consciousness disappears. Sleep involves different patterns of neural activity than waking. We can even distinguish different contents of consciousness by looking at brain scans. When you see a face, one pattern activates. When you hear music, another pattern. The correlations are precise and repeatable. We know consciousness requires certain kinds of information, integration. The brain is not a collection of independent modules. It is a highly connected network. Information flows between regions, is combined, integrated. Theories like integrated information theory propose that consciousness depends on how much integrated information a system contains. More integration means more consciousness. A brain has high integration. A collection of disconnected neurons does not. This explains why you are conscious but a pile of sand is not, even though both are made of particles following physical laws. We know consciousness has levels. You can be more or less conscious, fully awake, drowsy, dreaming, under anesthesia, in a coma. These are not binary states. They are points on a spectrum. Brain activity changes along this spectrum. Certain networks become more or less active. Connectivity increases or decreases. Measuring these changes lets us assess consciousness in patients who cannot communicate. Locked-in patients, vegetative state patients, people in comas. We can sometimes tell if they are conscious by looking at their brain activity alone. We know some things about the neural correlates of consciousness, not where consciousness is located. The brain does not have a consciousness center, but which patterns of activity correspond to conscious experience versus unconscious processing. There is a lot of unconscious processing. Most of what your brain does, you are not aware of. You are not aware of how your brain controls your heartbeat, or adjusts your pupils, or processes the raw visual data from your retinas. All of that happens unconsciously. Consciousness seems to involve specific patterns, recurrent processing, feedback loops, activity in the thalamus and cortex. When these patterns are disrupted, consciousness fades. So we know quite a bit. But notice what we do not know. We do not know why any of this produces experience. We can describe the neural patterns. We can measure the information integration. We can map the correlates. But none of that explains the feel, the subjective quality. Why seeing red feels like something. Not just why red looks different from blue. That is easy. Different wavelengths activate different neurons. But why either of them feels like anything at all. Why consciousness exists in the first place. This is the explanatory gap. You can describe all the physical facts, all the neural activity, all the information processing, and still not have explained the experience. The experience is something over and above the physical facts, or at least it seems that way. It feels like there is something left out, something the physical description misses. The redness of red, the painfulness of pain, the taste of coffee, these are real. But they do not appear in the physical description. Materialists say this is an illusion. There is no gap. Consciousness just is brain activity. The feeling of redness just is neurons firing in a certain pattern. You think there is something extra because you are confused about concepts. Once you understand the brain properly, the mystery dissolves. But this does not feel right. Even when you understand the brain, you have not explained why it feels like anything. The feeling remains unexplained. Dualists say consciousness is not physical. It is a separate substance. Mind versus matter. The brain is physical. Consciousness is not. They interact somehow. The brain causes conscious experiences. Conscious experiences influence the brain, but they are fundamentally different kinds of things. This solves the explanatory gap. Physical stuff does not have to explain conscious stuff because they are separate, but it creates new problems. How do two different substances interact? How does the non-physical mind affect the physical brain without violating physics? Where does consciousness come from, if not from the brain? Dualism raises more questions than it answers. Panpsychists say consciousness is fundamental, like mass or charge. It is a basic feature of reality, not something that emerges from complexity, not something special about brains. Everything has some degree of consciousness, even electrons, even atoms, not human-level consciousness, not self-awareness or thought, but some primitive experiential quality, some proto-consciousness. And when you combine lots of these proto-conscious elements in the right way, you get human consciousness. This avoids the hard problem by saying consciousness does not emerge. It is already there, always was. But it sounds crazy and raises its own questions. What is it like to be an electron? How do you combine tiny consciousnesses into one big consciousness? Why do some combinations produce rich experience and others do not? Every proposed solution has problems. Materialism denies the phenomenon. Dualism creates interaction problems. Panpsychism sounds absurd. Idealism says everything is consciousness and matter is the illusion. But then how do you explain the regularities of physics? Why does the physical world seem so solid and law-governed if it is really just consciousness? No view is satisfying. Every view gives up something intuitive.
Feynman did not pick a view. He did not think he had enough information to decide.
He said maybe someday someone would figure it out, or maybe not. Maybe consciousness is just one of those things we live with but do not understand, like existence itself. We exist. We are conscious. We know these as direct facts, but explaining them might be impossible, not because we are not smart enough, but because explanation has limits. Some things just are. And that is all you can say. Philosophers have devised thought experiments to sharpen the problem, to show exactly where our understanding breaks down. These thought experiments do not solve the problem, but they make clear what the problem is and why it is so hard. The first is the zombie argument, conceived by philosopher David Chalmers. A philosophical zombie is a creature physically identical to you, atom for atom, neuron for neuron. Same brain structure, same behavior, same responses to stimuli. but no consciousness, no inner experience. Lights are on, but nobody is home, processing information in the dark. The question is this: is such a thing conceivable? Can you imagine a zombie version of yourself? Physically identical, behaviorally identical, but not conscious? If the answer is yes, if zombies are conceivable, then consciousness is not reducible to physical facts, because you can have all the physical facts, the entire physical structure, without consciousness. So consciousness must be something extra, something beyond physics. If the answer is no, if zombies are inconceivable, then maybe consciousness is just physical. Maybe once you specify all the physical facts, consciousness comes along automatically, necessarily. No gap, no mystery. Most people find zombies conceivable, at least initially. You can imagine it, a perfect behavioral copy with no inner life. But conceivability is tricky. You can conceive of things that are impossible. You can imagine water that is not H2O, but water is H2O necessarily, essentially. So conceivability does not prove possibility. Maybe zombies seem conceivable, but are actually impossible. Maybe consciousness is necessarily tied to physical structure. We just do not see the necessity because we do not understand consciousness well enough. The second thought experiment is the inverted spectrum. Conceived by John Locke centuries ago, when you look at something red, you have an experience, a quality, the redness, the subjective feel. Now imagine someone else. When they look at the same red thing, they have a different experience. What you experience as red, they experience as blue, and vice versa. But their behavior is the same as yours. They call red things red. They sort colors the same way. From the outside, you cannot tell, but inside the experiences are inverted. Is this possible? Can two people have inverted qualia? Again, if yes, then qualia are not determined by physical facts, because you can have the same physical facts, same brain structure, same behavior with different qualia, so qualia must be something extra. If inverted spectra are impossible, then maybe qualia are fixed by physics. Maybe there is only one way for a brain in this configuration to experience red. We have no way to test this. You cannot compare your experience of red directly with someone else's. You can only compare behaviors. And behaviors can be the same with different experiences. So the question remains open. And that itself is revealing. If qualia were just brain states, we should be able to settle this. But we cannot. The subjective character of experience is private.
Inaccessible. Woo. You only know your own experiences.
You can never know what it is like to be someone else. The third is Mary, the color scientist, proposed by Frank Jackson. Mary is a brilliant scientist who knows everything physical about color vision. She knows which wavelengths correspond to which colors. She knows how the retina works, how neurons process color information. She knows every physical fact about seeing color. But Mary has lived her entire life in a black and white room. She has never seen color herself. One day she leaves the room and sees red for the first time. Does she learn something new? The intuition is yes. She learns what red looks like, the experience, the quale. She knew all the physical facts, but she did not know the experience. So the experience is not a physical fact. It is something extra. Knowledge of physics does not give you knowledge of qualia. This suggests qualia are not physical, or at least not reducible to the kind of facts physics describes. Others disagree. They say Mary does not learn a new fact. She gains a new ability. The ability to recognize and remember red, or she learns the same old fact in a new way, through direct experience instead of through description. The fact does not change, just her relation to it. So maybe there is no gap after all. Maybe the intuition is misleading. The fourth is the hard problem itself, stated most clearly by David Chalmers. Though Feynman understood it decades earlier, the hard problem asks why physical processes give rise to experience. You can explain neural activity, information processing, behavior, all the functional facts. But explaining why this activity feels like anything, that is different. That is the hard problem. And we do not have even the beginnings of an answer. Some say the hard problem is a pseudo problem, a confusion. Once you explain all the functional facts, the brain processing information, responding to stimuli, reporting on its states, there is nothing left to explain. What you call the hard problem is just a failure to accept the functional explanation. But this misses the point. The functional facts do not explain the feel, the subjective quality. There is an explanatory gap. You can accept all the functional facts and still wonder why there is experience. Feynman thought these thought experiments revealed the limits of science. Science is good at explaining function, how things work, what causes what, but it is not good at explaining quality, why things feel the way they feel. That might not be a scientific question. It might be a category error, like asking what color Thursdays are or what justice weighs. The question seems grammatical, but it is asking for something that does not make sense in that domain. Does that mean consciousness is forever mysterious? Maybe. Or maybe we need new concepts, new ways of thinking, something beyond current physics, not dualism, not magic, but an expansion of our scientific framework to include experience as a fundamental feature, not reducible to anything else, just there, like space or time or mass, a basic element of reality. But we do not have that framework yet, and Feynman did not know if we ever would. He just knew the current framework was incomplete. Something was missing, either in our concepts or in reality itself. And until we figure out what it is, consciousness will remain the deepest mystery, the thing we know most directly and understand least. So what was Feynman's answer to the question of consciousness? His answer was, we do not know. Simple, honest, unsatisfying, but true. This was not laziness. Feynman was not avoiding the question. He had thought about it deeply. He understood the problem. He understood what makes it hard. He just refused to pretend he had an answer when he did not. And he thought nobody else had an answer either. Not really. Not yet. Maybe not ever. In one lecture, he said something like this: we do not know what it means to understand something. When we say we understand physics, we mean we can predict what will happen. We can calculate, we can test. But do we really understand why quantum mechanics works the way it does? Do we really understand why space and time exist? No. We just describe. We find patterns. We write equations. But the deep why escapes us. Consciousness is similar. We can describe correlations, brain states and experiences, neural patterns and perceptions. But we do not understand why. Why those patterns produce those experiences. Why anything produces experience at all. And maybe understanding is not possible here. Maybe this is the limit. The place where explanation stops, where all you can say is, this is how it is. Take it or leave it. This is humility, real intellectual humility. Not the false humility where you pretend to know less than you do, but genuine recognition of the limits of knowledge. Feynman was brilliant. He knew it. He had solved problems others could not. But he also knew what he did not know. And he did not try to hide it. He did not invent theories to fill the gaps. He just said gap here. Unsolved. Maybe unsolvable. This attitude is rare. Most people want closure, want answers, especially scientists. Scientists are trained to solve problems, to find explanations, to not give up. And that is good. That drive has produced all of modern science, all of technology, all of medicine. But sometimes there are problems that do not yield. And insisting on an answer when you do not have one just produces bad answers. Wishful thinking. Consciousness has generated a lot of wishful thinking. Theories that sound good but explain nothing, that use fancy words to disguise confusion. Feynman avoided that. He said consciousness might be beyond science, not because science is bad, but because the question might not fit the scientific method. Science answers how questions. How does this work? How do you predict that? Consciousness asks a why question. Why does this feel like anything? and why questions often do not have scientific answers. They have historical answers or philosophical answers or no answers at all. Does this mean we should give up? Stop researching consciousness? No, we should keep studying the brain, keep mapping neural correlates, keep testing theories of information integration. All of that is valuable. It tells us when consciousness occurs, what it correlates with, how to detect it, how to manipulate it. Useful knowledge, important knowledge, but it will not solve the hard problem. It will not explain why there is experience. That might remain forever mysterious. And maybe that is okay. We live with mysteries all the time. We do not know why the universe exists. We do not know why the laws of physics are what they are. We do not know if there are other universes or if ours is unique. These are deep mysteries, permanent mysteries perhaps, but we do not let them stop us. We study what we can study, we explain what we can explain, and we accept that some things are beyond us. Consciousness is like that. The most intimate fact of your existence, the most obvious thing about your life, and also the most mysterious. You cannot doubt it. You cannot explain it. And Feynman said, that is fine. Dear, live with it, experience it, study the correlates, but do not expect full understanding. Do not expect science to make consciousness intuitive or obvious. It might never be. And that does not diminish science. It just shows that reality is deeper and stranger than our categories,
Richer than our frameworks.
more mysterious than we imagined. This is what Feynman taught. Not just about consciousness, about everything. Be honest about what you know. Be honest about what you do not know. Do not confuse description with explanation. Do not confuse prediction with understanding. Science is powerful, extraordinarily powerful, but it has limits. And recognizing those limits is part of being a good scientist. Consciousness is the limit, the place where science meets its match, where all our tools and methods and concepts fall short, maybe temporarily, maybe permanently. Feynman did not know. Neither do we. And maybe that is the deepest truth about consciousness, that it exists, that we experience it, and that we do not understand why. And maybe we never will.